Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. Today we are going to begin with a new series titled Economic Sociology. Now, economic sociology as a discipline is kind of considered as part of sociology, and the beginning of it began in the late 18th and beginning of 19th century, where there was a large scale transformation in the economy with the emergence of capitalism and liberal forms of economy. A lot of discourse turned around how do we differentiate between the economy of, say, pre-capitalist society and the relationship between economy and market relations. So keeping in mind the emergence of economic sociology as a sub-discipline, in today's lecture I am going to discuss on two important approaches to economic sociology, that is formalism and substantivism. Now when we look into this emergence of these two economic approach, we see that the formalism and substantivism appeared in the 1960s in the emergence of two groups of anthropologists who were engaged in kind of a dialogue in terms of how do you make a relationship between economy and society. So these anthropologists were engaged in heated exchange over the applicability of formal economic theory to primitive economy, that is non-capitalist, non-industrial economy, and these two branches in economic anthropology were termed as formalism and substantivism. Formalism is based on a deductive and logical mode of thinking, whereas substantivism is descriptive and built on experience. Now, if we look into formalism, the term itself implies formal. So, formal means logical reasoning, what is kind of appearing to the sciences, to rationality, whereas substantive means something which is dependent of everyday experience. So, the formalist orientation is based on the idea of economic rationality, of maximizing individuals, whereas substantivists argue that economy is embedded in social cultural context. So the formalists are trying to say that man is going to kind of make the best advantage of the resources. Human beings are seen as rational beings who are going to maximize the profit, whereas the substantive are saying that the economic action is dependent on the social cultural relations. And the most important figure that we will discuss in today's lecture is Karl Polanyi. According to Polanyi, the formalist schema can only be applied to the study of modern capitalist economies, where price-making markets play a crucial role. So when we look into the economy where market is dominant, the whole idea of regulations, the idea of rules comes in, and therefore the formal relations can be therefore captured or observed by those studying the economy and society. Whereas the substantivist approach deals with institutional forms taken by process of satisfaction of human needs in different society, both past and present, and the main concern being sufficiency rather than efficiency. So in a formal economy, the market rules, say the capitalist economy, the focus is on profit maximization, and therefore how do individual make the maximum profit? By kind of increasing the efficiency. Whereas the substantivist would say that we need to kind of have an economy which substantiates our everyday need. So sufficiency becomes important for the substantivist approach. The formalist and substantivist debate remains a crucial point of discussion in economic sociology, primarily concerning the appropriate method for studying economic systems across diverse society. So according to the substantivist, formal approach would apply only to, say, the capitalist economy, and therefore the doubt was how do we study pre-capitalist, non-capitalist economy. Now let us first try to understand what was the formalist approach or what is formalism. Formalism is a perspective within economic anthropology taking lead from the theories of neoclassical economics. It operates on the assumption that economic principles governing capitalist economy are not just relevant but also universal. This means that the same principle can be applied to understand economic action in both industrial society and pre-industrial societies. Formals argue that the rational behavior of individual seeking to maximize their benefits is constant that can explain transaction, trade and market interaction across different culture and time. So for the formalist, economy just has kind of a universal meaning across society, and that is profit maximization through rational means. And therefore, if we kind of look into a lot of economic theory of the neoclassical period, it talks about how society is traversing from one stage of development to the other. According to formalists, the study of economic system should focus on the rational decision making process where individuals aim to maximize utility or profit. It is influenced by neoclassical economic thought, which puts a spotlight on supply and demand and the importance of price in allocating resources. So, if we kind of apply a formal approach to understand economy, some of the key concepts would be supply and demand. So, the demand would depend on how much of supply, and that the relationship between supply and demand determines the market price, and depending on the price, the allocation of resources would depend on how much of purchasing capacity individuals have. So, this was a very formal understanding of the economy. Let us look into some of the key features of the formalist perspective. Number one, assumption of rational economic actors. The formalists believe that individuals, regardless of their cultural or social context, are motivated by self-interest and will act rationally to maximize the utility. So, the function of economy is to kind of maximize profit, that is, and increase your efficiency. Increasing efficiency would ultimately lead to more of production, and that is through a rational logical relationship between the economy and society. The second key feature is universal principle. The formalists contend that economic principles are universally applicable and can be used to analyze any economic system regardless of its culture or historical context. So, whether we talk about economy in the pre-capitalist society, or we talk about primitive society, or you talk about market based, the universal principle is maximization of profit and rationality. The third feature is emphasis on methodological individualism. So, it is a market relation. So, there is no kind of a collective activity. It all depends on how much an individual can maximize his profit by rationalizing the resources. So, the formalist, the importance is on individual decision making process and analyze the economic system from the perspective of individual actors. So, in a market, it is the individual decision whether to kind of buy a product depending on the demand, depending on the price of it or not. So, if we kind of look into it, it is kind of giving more emphasis to this idea of rational decision making. The formalists believe that the market economy is universal applicable system. They see the market mechanism as a natural outcome of individuals acting in their own self-interest to maximize utility or profit. It is a view that sidelines cultural or social influences, suggesting that when it comes to economic behavior, people everywhere are fundamentally the same. So, it is not kind of looking into where the importance of non-material factors, say the culture, the kinship relationship. Only emphasis is that everything is materialistic and all relations can be explained through a material interpretation of the social of the happenings or the social relations. Rationality, as we have discussed, becomes a universal trait that drives economic action irrespective of the societal context. The cornerstone of formalism is the concept of rationality. Formalists posit that individuals are rational actors who make decisions based on cost benefit analysis. So, it is not in terms of ideas that influence how one should take a decision, it is the individual understanding of the market and the demand and supply that kind of the decisions are made. Whether it's Wall Street trader or a farmer in a remote village, formalists argue that both are motivated by the same basic economic instinct, and that is to maximize their benefit. This could mean profit, utility, or satisfaction. The idea is that economic systems do not need to be understood differently just because they operate within the different cultural milieus. So, the formalists were emphasizing on universality and rationality. Now, economic action was to be seen as universal, and the function was all everywhere the same, and therefore how can you kind of ensure that economy is enable you to maximize your efficiency and make profit. Now, if we look into formalism in the pre-industrial society, one of the intriguing application is the perspective on pre-industrial societies. Formalists contend that even in the society without developed market system, economic behavior can still be understood through the lens of rationality and individual benefit maximization. Though the idea of how we interpret a pre-capitalist society is different, we will not kind of look into it from a market principle, but yet even in a pre-capitalist society, according to the formalist, the focus is to maximize your benefit. The formalists argue that the absence of market does not imply the absence of economic reasoning. So, it is not to kind of have a correlation between market and the emergence of reasoning. Reasoning existed even in pre-market society. They suggest that the principle of supply and demand and the rational behavior of individual can still explain economic activist in non-market society. So, if we go back to Malinowski and he raised in his work on magic, religion and science, he kinds of raises a question, do we think that the primitive society are akin to rational reasoning? And the answer he provided is that no. They have a good understanding of their everyday life, their season, the weather around, the climate around, and accordingly kind of organizes the economic activity. So, to kind of consider market as equivalent to economic rationality is incorrect according to the formalist approach. Now, when we come to the substantivist approach, they kind of emerge as a critique to the formalist. So, the substantive approach argue that economic systems are embedded within the social and cultural context, necessitating the consideration of these factors when studying economic phenomena. So, for the substantive, it is not only the material condition, but it is also the non-material conditions which becomes important in terms of economic decision making. The substantivist emphasizes the role of culture, institution and social relationship in shaping economic behavior. So, there is a kind of connect between the material aspect and the non-material, and that is where the concept of embeddedness comes in. Economy is not in kind of happening in a vacuum. It depends on the culture and the other social institutions where that economic system or institution is functioning. According to the substantivist, the difference between the industrial capitalist economy of the West and the pre-market economy was one of substance, and therefore the term substantivist is being used, and different forms of economy were not susceptible to analysis by a uniform method. So, the meaning of economy, the functioning of economy is not the same in all society. So, we cannot study them through a universal uniform method. According to the substantive definition, economy is seen as an instituted process. The economy is an institution, and this instituted process consists of interaction between man and his natural and social environment. Such a process results in an ongoing and, in this case, universal supply of material means to satisfy human needs and is the foundation of the method advised by Karl Polanyi, the institutional analysis. Karl Polanyi identified three major patterns of the so-called integration or the interaction between economy and society. These three were reciprocity, redistribution and market exchange. If we look into the distinction between a capitalist society and a pre-capitalist society, the capitalist society market exchange is dominant, whereas in the other society it is reciprocity and redistribution. So, when we look into the three patterns which kind of looked into in terms of combination and permutation, we see it kind of results in what we call economy, and the combination is to give economy its unity and stability, that is interdependence and recurrence of its part. According to Polanyi, classification of primitive or tribal societies are characterized by reciprocity and to some extent by redistribution. Reciprocity in the sense there was a lot of interdependence on each other. There was a lot of barter exchange, exchange of resources, and that is kind of was based on almost an egalitarian relation, say take and give relation, and that is why reciprocity was dominant. Archaic society in turn are predominantly redistributive, although there may be room for some exchange. But market exchange, it is dominated in a capitalist society. The system of self-regulated market as the dominant form and integration is only to be found in the modern societies. Redistribution and reciprocity are more common in non-market economy. If we look into some of the key features of the substantivist perspective, we see the most important feature is embeddedness. And embeddedness implies that the economy is kind of influenced by social cultural relations. So, the substantivists assert that economic activities are embedded in the social and cultural context and cannot be separated from them. The inclusion of the non-economic or the non-materialist conditions for economy is very important. The second feature is social relation. The focus on the role of social relationships and institutions in shaping economic behavior and the distribution of resources. The third key feature is historical and cultural specificity. So, unlike the formalist who said there is a uniform, universal kind of an idea of economy, the substantivists are arguing that economic systems should be studied in the specific historical and cultural context, recognizing the importance of these factors on economic behavior. The most important idea of how we differentiate the formalist and the substantive approach is when we look into the classical study of Trobriand by Malinowski. Malinowski's famous ethnography, the Trobriand Island, was a major influence on Karl Polanyi's development of the substantivist approach. Karl Polanyi felt that the substantive tools were more suitable for the analysis of pre or non-capitalist economy. Trobriand economy, there was no price setting market principle. Even fixed marketplaces seem to have been absent. Those who are familiar with the Malinowski study of Trobriand, we know it was an economy based on Kula exchange. Kula had not of non-material aspect rather than just material outcome. So, when we look into Malinowski's study, we see neither land nor labor could be purchased or rented. These factors of productions were inextricably embedded in the matrix of hereditary kinship, overseen lightly by chiefly eminent domain. So, the idea is that the Kula exchange was kind of dependent on a lot of non-material factor in terms of kinship relationship, in terms of the prestige and status in society. So we have a kind of very important understanding that how do we then apply a uniform universal method to study a society where there is an absence of market principle. So if we do a comparison between the formalist and the substantivist approach, we see that the first aspect is theoretical foundation. The formalist approach, the theoretical foundation is neoclassical economic theory, where the economy was determined by the principles of market, the demand, supply, profit maximization. Substantive approach, the embeddedness is important, implying that the economy is influenced by the social cultural institutions. The second aspect of differentiation is economic actors. In formalist approach, the rational, self-interested individuals are the main economic actors, whereas in substantive approach, the individual actors taking part in the economy are influenced by social relationships. So, kinship, religion and other cultural relations impact the way economy functions. The third is methodology. Formalist methodology is individualism, that is, it is the individual's decision making towards efficiency and profit maximization. Whereas in the substantivist approach, we see the methodology is holistic. Holistic, why? Because it is emphasizing on a relationship or on an interaction between the economy and the non-economic aspect. The fourth differentiation is on the basis of scope. So, as we discussed, the formalist approach is more universal. It kind of lays stress on a uniform method for studying economy across society, whereas the substantive approach, the scope is historical and cultural specificity. To study the economy of the Trobrianders would be different from studying the economy or the Wall Street market regulations. The fifth is key focus. The key focus in the formalist approach is utility, maximization, rational decision making, whereas in the substantive approach, it is social relations, institutions and embeddedness. So, if we kind of look into the difference, we know that they are kind of debating in terms of the methodology to be used or adopted for studying the economy. Should we have a uniform universal method, or should there be more stress on the cultural specificity of the society to understand the economy? Now, next let us look into how this debate between the formalist and the substantive kind of emerged within the discipline. So, the initial phase began in the 1950s or 60s when Karl Polanyi introduced the concept of embeddedness, which emphasized the importance of social relations and institutions in shaping economic systems. Prior to this, market, demand, supply, profit, surplus value, material orientations were the key concepts for understanding economy. This kind of left outside the scope of economy factors like religion, kinship, marriage, family, and that is why it was kind of a partial understanding. When we see the emergence of embeddedness as an important concept, it led to the development of substantivist approach, which sought to challenge the formalist perspective, which was more rooted in the neoclassical economic theory. Early proponent of the substantivist approach was George Dalton and Marshall Sahlin. They further took ahead the ideas of Polanyi by emphasizing the role of culture, social relationship and historical context in determining economic behavior. In response to the substantivist critique, the formalists such as Scott Cook and Harold Schneider defended the approach by arguing that universal economic principle could still be applied across diverse societies. Cook criticized the substantivist approach for being overly focused on the anti-market mentality, while Schneider contended that both market and non-market economy could be analyzed using the same economic principle. Thus, formalism could be applied universally to study any economy. If we look into the middle ground, so in terms of the controversy between the formalist and the substantive, there were a lot of theory which kind of emerged at the middle level. So, middle ground and synthesis, we see that as the debate continued, some scholars sought to find a middle ground between the two perspectives, formalism and substantivism. For instance, Clifford Geertz in 1978 introduced the concept of the bazaar economy. Bazaar is kind of meaning the market, which recognized the importance of cultural and social factor in shaping economic behavior, but also acknowledged the role of rational decision making. So, it was Clifford Geertz's approach was kind of more binding the two, formalist and the substantivist, whereby he is saying that even in the non-market economy, rational decision making is important. So, we cannot kind of negate the idea that non-market or pre-capitalist society rational reasoning was absent and everything was done according to the social cultural institution. So, if we were kind of combine formalist and substantivist, we see that economy kind of functions with the idea of rational decision making in terms of kind of giving a little regulation to the society. James Carrier in 1992 proposed a hybrid model that incorporate formalist and substantivist element, acknowledging the interplay between social context and individual agency. When you look into the recent development, the formalist and substantivist debate has a lot of complexities in understanding economic system of diverse society. In more recent years, the debate has become less polarized as economic anthropologists increasingly acknowledge the value of both perspectives. Many scholars now emphasize the importance of understanding economy as a complex interplay of culture, social relations, individual decision making, and necessitates the integration of both. So, when we conclude, we see that while both approaches are valuable, they have also faced a lot of criticism. For example, formalists have been critiqued for oversimplifying human behavior, whereas substantivists have overemphasized the cultural element. However, despite the criticism, both are relevant in understanding economy in a variable manner and kind of gives us a more holistic understanding of the relationship between economy and society. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.